Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm attempting the rarest checkmate in chess, the doubly disambiguated bishop capture checkmate, which requires 3 bishops disambiguated into a capture that is also a discovered attack. That is also checkmate. Let's get started with game number 1. Alright, game number 1. Now there are a couple of things that we're going to need to do before we even start the game. Number 1 is take inventory of what we actually need for the final checkmate. If we're going to doubly disambiguate bishops, if we're going to disambiguate bishops at all, then we need multiple bishops that actually could go to the same square, aka bishops that require disambiguation. Meaning, in the actual notation, I have to clarify if it's coming from the 3rd rank or the 5th rank in this case to move to e4. Now, to doubly disambiguate, that means we also need another bishop that can also move to that square. And in the notation, we would clarify if the bishop is coming from the d file or the f file, thus doubly disambiguating which bishop we're moving. Now, there's a tiny problem with this. We start off with a dark squared bishop, which can only move to dark squares, and a light squared bishop, which can only move to light squares. So there's literally no position in the history of chess ever where these two starting bishops need to be disambiguated because they can never move to the same squares anyways. So not only do we have to promote one of these pawns into a light squared bishop for a disambiguation, we need to promote 2 of them into light squared bishops, so there's that double disambiguation. That's step number 1 in terms of inventory. We need 2 more bishops of one of these 2 colors, and step number 2 is we actually need Martin to keep one of these pieces on the board. Now, preferably a pawn, because a pawn has way less movement than any other piece, so it'll be a lot easier to force a pawn into a position where we want it to have that final capture, which leads to that discovered attack checkmate. So that's the inventory. A, we need 2 extra bishops of one of these colors, and B, we need Martin to keep one of these pawns on the board, and we'll just hold it back. Besides that, I really only need like my king. I'll probably have a couple of pawns left over. I'm definitely keeping my queen. I mean, it's Martin. So those are the only 2 really specific things that I need to have on the board. Besides that, I can really just play a normal game of chess, and to be frank, Martin should not be that hard to take down. So we're going to go ahead and just grab all of this free material. The pawn goes ahead and attacks the knight, and I'm just going to play a very clean game of chess where I hold on to as much material as literally possible. Go ahead and defend that pawn on e4. And there we go, we get our first Martin-esque move. We'll pin the knight to the queen, which no doubt will eventually move. We'll develop the queen so we can castle, and this is all very normal development. Again, just kind of waiting for Martin to be Martin. There we go, the knight captures the pawn, which I can recapture with my knight. Obviously, I'm not taking the queen because the knight would simply take back, so we'll capture here. And I'll go ahead and fast forward through this simplification. Okay, we have gone ahead and stripped Martin basically down to the bare bones, and because I've decided to keep the B pawn, basically just because of how the game played out, it was easiest, eventually I'm going to need this pawn on B2, so I'm going to need a trio of dark squared bishops. All of these other pieces are basically excessive. So I'll go ahead and promote these 2 pawns to dark squared bishops, the F pawn and the D pawn, and I'll meet back with you guys in just a moment. Okay, we have our 2 bishops. You can see I've already started shedding some material to reduce the risk that I accidentally stalemate Martin. But I do have my 2 bishops, and we also have that crucial b6 pawn for that final capture. Now, as far as actually setting up the rest of this checkmate, there are honestly a couple of different ways I could do this, but I think ultimately I'm going to want my king over here, and I want his king on my 1st rank. And then once I kind of have the king corralled into, say, g1 and h1, I don't really care how many moves Martin wastes going back and forth. I'll have plenty of time to get my bishops set up, and then eventually I kind of have to force this pawn past that exact tempo. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but I'm sure we can make it work. Let's go ahead and shed off any extra material that we definitely don't need. Okay, I've gone ahead and shed some material. I've also just realized that somehow I'm going to have to get Martin to use his king and capture all of these pawns. Otherwise, there's literally no way for this B pawn to ever make it to B2. So let's start corralling the king over. I just have to be super careful not to stalemate him by accident. Okay, so far so good. I have him on the back rank and ready to capture all of these pawns. I'll go ahead and release the protection of the queen of the c2 pawn and hope that he takes. Okay, he's going to be Martin and make some silly moves. I'll also release the protection of the b2 pawn to allow him to just grab absolutely whatever he pleases. Wonderful, he's getting the message. Now I just have to basically wait for him to take all of these pawns. Wonderful news. Okay, we've managed to get rid of those 3 pawns, which I frankly completely forgot about when considering how I needed to set this up, but this is really good. Now we're going to maneuver his king back over to g1. Also, the great thing is that every time a capture happens, it resets the 50 move rule, so we have at least 50 moves now after this last capture to set up this checkmate. Step number 1 will be to corral the king into g1 and h1 so that Martin has no choice but to move back and forth, and then we'll get the rest of our pieces set up. Nice, with the king on the back rank, we can just keep the queen a knight's distance away from the king, which always ensures that he can't come back and he can't move past the second rank. So we'll just walk him down until the queen is on e2. In fact, I could actually make this even easier for myself. I'm going to use the king to corral Martin's king in this case, and then I'll unleash the bishop to f1 because this queen is going to have to be on b1 to deliver the final discovered checkmate. So let's unleash the knight. This is all feeling very official because I can't even believe we've gotten this close. This is honestly a little easier than I thought it was going to be. We have now the bishop corralling f1, or rather corralling the king by not allowing him to move to f1. And then we have our king creating the final fence, which means Martin's king is obviously forever stuck on g1 or h1. So I basically don't even have to think about Martin's king anymore. As long as I don't accidentally hit g1 or hit h1 and prevent him from being able to move, then I just need to worry about getting all of my bishops to their proper squares, and then eventually somehow I need this pawn to move past. So okay, let's start placing bishops where we know they belong, right? One has to be on a1. We definitely need a bishop on c1 because that's the one that's going to capture, and unleash the queen on b1 to deliver that discovered check. And then we also definitely need a bishop on c3. So let's move this knight out of the way, which is kind of impeding the ability of this bishop to travel to c3. Wonderful. And now we have bishops on the same file and on the same rank, which means we will need to, or rather the notation will have to doubly disambiguate that this is a bishop that is on the first rank and also the bishop that is on the C file. Let's drop the queen on B2, just making super sure that I'm not stalemating him by accident, then B1, and now we've also created the aspect of the checkmate that will lead to a discovered check. Now the final step is we need this pawn on this square, which I actually think should be like not that hard to do at all. Step number 1 is get this bishop out of the way so that this pawn never has the option to simply capture on c3. That would be very counterproductive. And then step number 2 is find a way that we can trap this king, but then also quickly release. And I think that's going to require this knight landing on h3. So my idea is if this king is stuck on h1 because the knight covers g1, then this pawn has no choice but to walk. And then once it gets to b3, I release the tension that I have on the king. He will be able to move back to g1 and h1 once more, and then I move the bishop out of the way. I'll have to time a nice check with the knight that forces the king to move out of the way, and then once that pawn promotes, then I take. It all sounds very convoluted, but trust me, this makes sense. King has no choice but to move to h1. Now we trap the king. The king is stalemated. This pawn had no choice but to advance. Now I have to make a totally neutral waiting move. I can just move this bishop, let's say, maybe not d4, because then we're covering g1 twice, but e5 should work. Pawn must advance again. Now we move the bishop back. Pawn has to go to b3, there's no other move. And now, really careful, because now he's in stalemate, we release the stalemate net, and the king can now go back to doing the little dad bod shuffle that he was doing in the corner. Now the final step here is to get him to move the pawn. To be frank, I think I could just move this bishop here, and there's a non-zero chance that Martin pushes this pawn, and then I can just doubly disambiguated discover check him on g1. But if this doesn't work, then we'll just trap the king. Wonderful news. Okay, now with knight to h3 or knight to f3, we once again reinvigorate the stalemate trap, leaving him no choice but to play b2. Again, we have that doubly disambiguated bishop moving from c1 to b2, which is also a capture, which is also a check, which is also checkmate. So knight to h3, and then we should be able to simply take on b2 to deliver that doubly disambiguated bishop capture checkmate. I'll go ahead and pop up on screen the exact notation, but this is by Paralogical's video, which will be the first link in the description down below, the rarest, or most likely the rarest checkmate in all of chess. If you guys did enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Let me know down below if there are any weird checkmates that I should get, and I will see you guys in the next one.